Welcome to Creepy Confidential. I'm your host, Noelle, your resident weirdo Wisconsinite. I open case files on cryptids, cults, conspiracies, and otherworldly creepy, bringing you new cases, live broadcasts, and local lore. So get ready, creeps. It's Creepy Confidential. Key West, Florida, United States of America. A young man sits in a small wooden chair. He wears a slightly oversized weathered white sailor outfit, adorned with embroidered pale blue anchors, and on his arm is a bright red petty officer ranking insignia. A classic sailor Dixie cup cover adorns his head with a small amount of his blonde hair peeking out near the brim. His face is worn, covered in small brown scar-like nicks. His tiny nose, beady eyes, and a slight smirking grin are on his face. In this little boy's lap sits his petite companion. A little tan, short-haired canine sits with an excited expression on his face, with an open mouth, perhaps panting in excitement. Robert is not a normal young man. He lives behind UV filtering glass in a humidity-controlled room. He's caused car accidents, broken bones, job loss, divorce, and a cornucopia of various misfortunes. He's 118 years old and isn't made of flesh and bone, but rather fabric, foam, and canvas. Robert the Doll is one of the most infamous cursed objects in the United States and isn't alive at all. Or is he? Sup, creeps, and welcome to another episode of Creepy Confidential. Today we are talking about the most cursed doll, if not one of the most cursed objects in the United States and quite possibly the world. Just diving into this story puts us all at risk of his potential wrath. I'm talking about Robert the Doll. Now, this little guy has it all. He's allegedly talked, walked, cursed, and inspired one of the biggest horror movie franchises to date, Child's Play. That's right, creeps. Chucky is directly inspired by Robert the Doll. Ugh, I hate those movies. So let's talk at the beginning here. So his origin story, right? So his origin story is also neck and neck with the storyline that they used in the movie. Of course, not exactly, but the whole story of a child that is given a doll. The child loves the doll, and the doll wants to be human, and then chaos ensues. Story neck and neck with each other. Within Robert's story, the details are pretty solid, except for one little difference that I found where exactly Robert got the doll and where it came from. I was able to find kind of two paths that lead to him being given the doll. One is definitely more concrete than the other, and I'm going to stick to the origin story that the museum and the current caretakers have historically tracked back, and I'm going to mention where I found this. The other story may differ, but from what I've discovered, I think it's kind of a game of telephone where someone indulged somewhere here or there, and that's how we have this other story that exists. So Robert Eugene Otto was gifted this doll by his father after his father returned from a trip to Germany in 1904. The doll was manufactured by the company called a Steiff Company, a German toy company that made teddy bears. Now, apparently, though, this doll was a one-off model that was going to be used in maybe a window at a department store, but originally had kind of jester or clown expressions. The early part of the doll's origin story is where this other timeline seems to exist. Somehow, another story of the doll is where it's being given to the child by some sort of ill-treated housekeeper situation after it got cursed by voodoo by this angry housekeeper, and then it was given to the child. This shows up on many websites and even on a few B-rated books that I found. You can tell where they have like punctuation errors, spelling errors, where it's kind of like a half slapped together book because they know that curses and scary things sell. So those books I really kind of only take at half price, we'll say. But the story I'm going to stick with is where the museum, the Fort East Martello Museum, where Robert the Doll currently lives now, they've researched and tracked the doll's origin to ensure where he might have come from. So why do we have these two stories? Perhaps somewhere along the line, someone wanted to make the story sound even more scary or sinister, as if we needed it to be more sinister, and that's how that part was born. So now that we know that where these two stories differentiate a little bit, but let's go back. So this little boy named Robert, is given the doll, and after just a few short weeks of having this brand new toy, he tells his parents that the doll wants to be referred to as Robert. So they both can't be referred to as Robert. So the boy says, I'm going to be referred to as Eugene, which is actually Robert's middle name. So now Robert becomes Robert the doll, and Robert the boy becomes Eugene. And the doll would take his birth name, Robert, and then Eugene would continue for the rest of his life. And that's what he would go by. He would never go back to being called Robert, even in his older years when he doesn't have a dolly anymore. So that part's kind of crazy. Now, the outfit, though, now if we say this came from some sort of, toy manufacturer, where did his clothes come from? So the clothes that Robert the doll now is wearing, these were Eugene's. And I even stumbled across a photo of Eugene wearing this cute little sailor outfit while playing outside with another small child. So to me, this is where Robert kind of powers up a little bit. Think of it as like reverse Dobby, if you will. But instead of like, Master has given Dobby a sock, Dobby is free, it becomes more like, Master has given Robert his clothes, Robert is alive. One of those kind of things. So I have a feeling this just kind of fed to whatever is floating around in this doll. Now, things really ramped up quickly. Eugene insisted that Robert go everywhere with him. He would sit at the dinner table. He would set a table setting for him at the dinner table. Robert would be with him during bath time, watching over. Eugene would disappear for hours into his room, and his parents would hear him talking, Eugene talking, and then all of a sudden a much deeper voice would reply. So his mother goes rushing upstairs to check who the intruder was that's playing with her son, and she would only find Eugene and Robert the doll. His parents could never get Eugene to duplicate that deeper voice wherever it may have come from, and Eugene swears that it was Robert. Even I get the two confused after reading about Robert and Eugene. So his mother and father, would take note that the face of this doll would change the expressions ever so slightly each time they would see him. They also noticed that Robert would change locations around the room, but when no one was there to move him, which is very strange, of course. Then we're getting Chucky visions, right? Chucky. So this went on for quite a bit, but they were just kind of telling themselves, talking to each other that they were perhaps just imagining things. It was just getting to their imagination. And some time went by one night when they were woken up by the scream of their little boy, Eugene. They swung the door open only to find that all the items in the room had been tossed around and placed upside down. Now, Eugene insisted that Robert had done it. Over time, more damage is done to the house, including furniture, glassware, and Eugene always insists that Robert is the one who's doing it. And of course, the damage never happens if Eugene and Robert are not at home. So, of course, the parents, they've had enough, right? They're like, this is enough. And they banish the doll to the attic. Now, here's what I don't get. Why the attic? If I was convinced something in my house was cursed, bye, Felicia. It will be burned and banished to the landfill. It will not sit in the trash in my house. Oh no, my butt is taking it in the car to the local Kmart, and in their trash it will go. If I get home and it's there, to the incinerator it will go, seeing as I have the means to make a cloth doll disappear in an incinerator. Robert, if you're listening, this is hypothetical. I'm not talking about you, just a what-if situation. P.S. Robert, thank you for listening to Creepy Confidential. Tell your other doll friends. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Anyway, so Robert's in the attic, right? Eugene's upset. So upset. However, they hear footsteps from the attic. They hear giggling. And from the road, people would tell them that they would see somebody looking out the window, which is impossible. Supposedly, Eugene's auntie is the one who took Robert up to the attic, and supposedly she was the first one to meet an ill fate, as just one night after separating Robert from Eugene, she was dead, which is crazy. Now, servants that would come to work in the house would quit shortly after being hired, and they could not keep help because they were terrified of what was happening in the house. So he stayed locked in the attic over the years, and as an adult, Gene moves away. He moves away to Paris to pursue his love of painting. Now, those who are keeping tabs on the side-by-side of Chucky versus Robert, so far, we are right on track. Sort of, right? Because movies have to take their embellishment, and also movies got to make money. So there's like 2 more before we get to this point. So Chucky 1, Chucky 2, Child's Play. The little boy is still a little boy. But Child's Play 3, Andy is sent to a military school and told to forget this crazy nonsense about Chucky, this doll, and that they are essentially trying to scare this poor kid straight, even though those who have watched the movie, this poor kid, his mom went nuts, all these people died, and he's just supposed to be normal. Anywho, squirrel, right? Back on track. So Child's Play. So far, we're kind of tracking both stories. So Eugene goes to Paris, and he leaves Robert still trapped in the attic. And a few years go by, he returns, gets married, and they move back into his childhood home after his mom passes away. He immediately finds himself retrieving his childhood friend from the attic, and they pick up right where they left off. Never mind his wife, being completely creeped, by the way. He starts talking to him, taking him everywhere, and even has furniture commissioned for him. So Annette, Eugene's wife, never sees Robert do anything directly, but was not happy about having the doll around. Now, I wouldn't be either. Can you imagine? Wow, honey, your ankles sure are making me hot and bothered. We should retire to the bedroom, but wait, let me grab Robert. I don't think so, my dude. I don't think so. That's just crazy to me. So, continuing on. Reportedly, when Eugene would act out of pocket, get a little gnarly with his attitude towards Annette, he would blame Robert for his actions. Now, if I was Robert, I'd be like, WTF, homie, I thought we were friends. But apparently, nope, he says this is Robert. So Robert's in the doghouse again, and she insists that he needs to go. He places Robert in the window of his childhood bedroom. Now, the neighbor kids were equally freaked out as they started to take different ways home so that they would avoid the auto house altogether when they were just trying to get from point A to point B, so that they wouldn't have to look at him from the window. So Robert gets his own spot in Eugene's room, and now he's got it all. Now, perhaps Robert put this idea in Eugene's head. He's like, hey, I would like a window seat, and I'd like some of my own furniture. That would be great, thanks. So Eugene would spend most of his time for the next 40 years in this room, painting and creating his art with Robert watching over him. In 1974, Eugene passed away, and Annette immediately placed Robert back in the attic. She had enough and sold the house later that year to a lady named Myrtle ruder. Now Myrtle would hear footsteps and giggling from the attic. Nothing up there per se when she would go and look, but she did find an old dusty trunk. And of course she opens it up and there's Robert. Now upon first glance, if it was me, I'd be like, ooh, this doll's kind of creepy. But actually she found Robert very charming and brought him downstairs back into the main house and jokingly thinking, kind of like, oh, I'll just bring him down here. Maybe that'll calm him down. If I heard footsteps, found a possessed looking doll's got to go. But again, maybe I think differently. So if she would have company over and speak ill of Eugene, previous owners, the doll's expressions would apparently change. But still, she did not fear him. Myrtle kept him in her life, and they seemed to have a pretty normal, kind of positive life experience until 1994. She moved and took Robert with her. She woke up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water and could not open the bedroom door despite trying and trying. The full happenings of that night she never fully disclosed. However, the next day, Robert the doll was donated to the museum where he still resides to this day. So it was bad enough that she woke up and was like, you're out. I'm kicking you out. I'm taking you there myself. There was no more up in the attic, whatever. You're just going. Now, shortly following her donation of Robert, she passed away. And of course, her reason for death was never disclosed. Now, like the two stories in the beginning, there's two stories that exist about his donation. The first one is Myrtle disclosed nothing extra, and the museum just merely found him as an interesting artifact from some time during the turn of the century. The second, which makes more sense on how this whole story kind of started, Myrtle disclosed the story of the Otto family and that the doll was haunted and that she just couldn't take it anymore. Now, the museum didn't really have room to display him right away. However, people would visit and ask to see the haunted doll, and the buzz surrounding him started to just bubble up. The workers in the museum would tell stories of Robert running around the museum. And then, now this was prior to him being locked in his, little cell that he is now. One night, the last worker was there closing up, locking all the doors. All the switches were turned off for the lights. The person arrives to their car only to turn around and look at the building and see that all the lights are back on. And then they note that there are 8 switches that would have had to have turned on simultaneously to turn around and see all the lights turn on. So you actually, it's pretty particular to know that there are 8 switches. So the museum decided that Robert needed his own display. They set him up with his little canine companion that we see now. Just remember that he did not initially have this little friend. They decided they were going to put him in the case with him. And this is kind of when the shenanigans really kicked it up a notch. It was this point in time, and people really started claiming that Robert had the ability to curse anyone who looked at them, or at least anyone who didn't ask his permission. So photos would be blurry, batteries would be drained, memory cards would be white blank when they would go to look at the photos. And even one photographer came with an actual film camera, for those of you who are old enough to know what film is, a film or a photographer, film camera to take photos of Robert and at the museum. He took his photos, and when he returned home, every single photo on the roll was of Robert. Now, I can understand why that would be a little alarming, but apparently he went to develop them, and every single one was of Robert. So the museum has now posted guidelines for visiting Robert. Basically, you need to ask for permission, you need to introduce yourself, and you need to thank Robert for his time. Now, that just sounds like common courtesy to me. I think we all should do that to each other. But these are the things that you must do. Now, letter after letter of people thanking him or begging his forgiveness have arrived. Now, those that are begging for forgiveness are usually from people that visited him and disrespected him. Maybe they spoke ill, they didn't ask permission, and then things started to happen. Now, one patron had a heck of a year, completely falling apart after being given a grave diagnosis following his visit with Robert the doll. None other than the Ozzy Osbourne. After coming into contact with Robert the doll, he had a very nasty year, including pneumonia, he had to have urgent surgery, and he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. The activity was through the roof. Now, over the years, the activity is really ramping up. Perhaps because the museum is giving in to Robert's behavior, or maybe Robert isn't happy that he never returned to the auto house, because that is really kind of his home. So I could get, that's kind of like it needs to get set back on the charging cradle, maybe. I'm not sure. So paranormal activity, though, is still noted in the auto home. They do investigations there. And so there's like a 2-for-1 special. Maybe there's other things going on, or maybe Robert the doll's person, Eugene, is there. Just perhaps it isn't the only spirit that floats around. Robert the doll and his canine companion still reside at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. They say that you don't have to visit him to become the next one that has his curse follow you around, but perhaps give a little thank you in his direction, as next time you see your favorite childhood doll, just remember.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi ho!